Welcome to today's Explainer. Get ready because we are diving into a truly fascinating analysis by Professor Sلقيني that completely flips how we view historical and modern global struggles. Today, we're unpacking a concept called the globalization of intellectual conflict. It's a massive eye-opener that moves way beyond the typical geopolitical narratives we're fed every day. So let's explore exactly how the source material challenges our conventional wisdom.
Right out of the gate, the author hits us with this incredibly provocative question. Think about the turmoil we see in the world today. Is it genuinely a clash of ideas? Or is it actually a conflict with what the author calls pharaohs? This question challenges literally everything we're traditionally taught about global tensions. It suggests that the real root of our struggles isn't what we typically assume at all.
To wrap our heads around this major paradigm shift, here is our roadmap. First, we'll debunk the myth of the clash of civilizations. Next, we'll examine thought versus pharaohs. Then, we'll break down the equation of expanding conflict. After that, we'll review some historical confrontations. And finally, we'll look at the modern duty of spreading thought.
Okay, let's jump straight into Section 1, the myth of the clash of civilizations. According to the source, to really understand global conflicts, we first have to completely dismantle a widely accepted geopolitical narrative.
So, we've all heard of the clash of civilizations, right? Well, the author posits that this is essentially a false narrative. It's a convenient myth used specifically to mask historical truth. Why? Because framing conflict as this horizontal clash between different cultures totally deflects attention away from the ruling class. The reality, the text argues, is that the real battle isn't horizontal, it's vertical. It's a continuous, ongoing clash between enlightened thought and tyrannical rulers who are desperate to suppress those ideas to maintain their grip on society.
The author uses history to show that civilizations don't actually inherently fight. Left to their own devices, they communicate, they dialogue, and they naturally merge. The text points to the peaceful spread of Islam into the Balkans, the Caucasus, and Malaysia as prime evidence. In these regions, millions of people embraced new ideas and integrated entirely different ways of life without a single sword being drawn. So, the source argues, if cultures naturally integrate, this clash we keep hearing about, it's an illusion. It's totally manufactured by those in power to keep people divided.
Moving on to Section 2. Thought versus pharaohs. Because if civilizations aren't the ones inherently fighting each other, we have to ask who exactly is orchestrating the conflict. Now, when the text uses the word pharaohs, scratch the image of ancient Egyptian kings building pyramids out of your mind. Here, it's used as a powerful metaphor for the modern era. The author uses it to represent modern dictators, global mafias, and basically any tyrannical system that is absolutely terrified of free thought. And the reasoning makes total sense. Free ideas and critical thinking directly threaten their absolute control and their wealth. Simply put, if the people think freely, the pharaohs lose their power. This brings us to a crucial point the author makes. Tyrants inherently lack intellectual arguments. They simply can't debate on a level playing field because their whole authority relies on subjugation, not logic. So the moment you expand your discourse and challenge the status quo with intellect, they panic. Unable to win a battle of ideas, the text argues these enemies of freedom have no choice but to declare war. They have to resort to media blockades, heavy censorship, and sheer physical force to silence the dialogue. That brings us to Section 3, the equation of expanding conflict. The source actually distills all of this historical friction into a very clear, predictable formula. Think of it as a domino effect that builds in 3 distinct steps. Step 1, the power and reach of free thought expands, which naturally threatens the establishment as the ideas gain momentum. Step 2, the pharaohs, those tyrannical systems, panic. Recognizing they have absolutely zero intellectual counterarguments, they drastically ramp up their oppression to keep control. Step 3, because of this violent pushback, the scope of the conflict violently widens. What started as just an intellectual discourse escalates into a massive struggle. So the friction isn't the fault of the idea itself, it's the desperate reaction of the oppressor. Let's look at Section 4, historical confrontations against tyranny. To prove this equation isn't just some modern political theory, the author grounds it in 3 profound historical case studies. By tracing this timeline, a truly fascinating pattern emerges. The author demonstrates how this exact same vertical conflict, thought versus tyranny, repeats itself across entirely different eras. By examining the ancient era, the pre-Islamic era, and the early Islamic era, the source argues that the underlying mechanics and oppression literally never change. Let's break down each one of these historical examples to see how the equation plays out.
Starting way back in the ancient era, with Prophet Ibrahim, the author explains that his act of breaking the idols wasn't mindless destruction. It was a highly calculated intellectual challenge. He deliberately left the biggest idol intact to force the people to ask, wait, why don't these gods defend themselves? He was inviting them to use their intellect. But the ruling elites, the pharaohs of that time, they had no logical answer. Their response wasn't a debate, it was brute force. They threw him into a raging fire to silence the intellectual threat entirely. Moving forward to the pre-Islamic era, the text examines the incredible story of the boy and the king, known as Ashab al-Ukhdud. This young boy presented a message of truth that resonated deeply with the masses, and because the tyrant king completely lacked the intellectual footing to counter the boy's influence, he went to extreme measures. He couldn't win their minds, so he used the horrific oppression of the fiery trench to instill terror. It's the equation perfectly in action. The idea expanded, the tyrant panicked, and the conflict violently widened. Finally, during the early Islamic era, we look at Prophet Muhammad at Al-Hudaybiyah. The author emphasizes that the Prophet's goal was simple. He just sought the freedom to share ideas, to engage in peaceful dialogue. Yet the ruling powers of Quraysh insisted on conflict. They chose war and blockades over simply allowing a message to spread freely. Why? Because the mere existence of free thought fundamentally threatened their absolute societal and economic grip. The pharaohs of Quraysh chose escalation over intellect. And that leads us to our final section, the duty of spreading thought. Having established this unbroken historical pattern, the text pivots to the big question, what does this mean for us today? The author argues very forcefully that modern individuals, particularly Muslims, and Islamic media have a steadfast duty to keep spreading thought. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that you have to view pushback from modern pharaohs not as a failure, but as a sign of true impact. If the systems of oppression are fighting your ideas, the author says it's proof that your ideas are actually working. Therefore, Islamic media has a fundamental duty to continually challenge these tyrannical narratives and make sure the intellectual discourse never dies. The author emphasizes that the transmission of knowledge is a continuous, unstoppable flow across generations. It's an unbroken chain of intellectual resistance that has survived from the time of Ibrahim all the way to today. The core message of the source text is that this stream of thought has to keep flowing, no matter how many dams, blockades, or obstacles are placed in its way by those in power. It's a generational baton, and it's being passed forward to us. Ultimately, the source encourages a total reframing of our worldview. The author posits that the intellectual conflict and the friction we experience today are not flaws in our civilization. Encountering resistance doesn't mean the message is wrong. Actually, it's the natural, inevitable byproduct of light challenging darkness. It's the exact friction you should expect whenever human intellect dares to challenge systems of enslavement. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought drawn straight from the source material. Are you, in the media you actively consume, fulfilling the duty of spreading the light of free intellect? Or are you passively accepting the manufactured narratives of today's pharaohs? It's a pretty profound question to ask ourselves in the modern age. Keep learning, keep questioning, and whatever you do, never let the intellect be silenced.